Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and we had brought in Chris Thomas a few months ago and to talk about his book, Elizabeth Smart, Unexpected, the Backstory. And so we also, after we were done with our show, we asked him some more questions, and we wanted to know more. Beth Magnetic wanted to know more from her Mormon true crime show. And so I'm going to try to share that with you right now, see how it goes, the rest of the story for that episode. Taking a little bit of time.
What is it like? Is the name of the podcast, and it's with Dan Heath. Dan Heath being the New York Times best-selling author of Switch and Born to Stick, and one of my favorite authors. And so I'm sitting here talking about it, and I cannot remember Dan Heath's name or the name of the podcast, but he does a phenomenal job. So maybe it was good, Gene, because I teased it, and they'll come to the site and they can drive some traffic.
That's what they'll get out of this extra little bit. So anyway, Beth.
Oh, I have so many questions.
Beth has questions.
So you were talking about how Baker opened you up to being more compassionate and understanding of people that you wouldn't otherwise understand. How does that impact you when it comes to Brian David Mitchell?
Sure. Everyone is complex. And I've worked around people at times that, I had a client that went to prison, had a couple that have gone to prison. I think that initially in working with them was under the premise that they were innocent. One was finally plead and serve their time. The other, the process is ongoing. But I think as you work with people, you start to look at their humanity. I try to look at people for, and he's a very complex individual. And again, I think I have to try, in my job too, my job is to communicate publicly, and to communicate. When I say that, that's not just media, but with key audiences. And so I'm looking out for my client's best interest. I remember getting some criticism after Elizabeth came home. There were some people that came and said, you should be defending the church. You're not speaking out against this. And I said, they're not my client, but, and I'm not, well, you should talk to them. Well, I'm happy to listen to them, but my laser focus is on what is in the best interest of Elizabeth Smart and taking care of her family. And if that involves a religion, which I hold true and is something very precious to me, that's fine. But if it's not, my job is not, again, I have to be objective in how I look at it. And looking at Brian David Mitchell, might have some of my own personal opinions about him and otherwise, but as I'm looking at him and as I was working around him, it was very much from the perspective of my client.
And that's one of the key things that I like to talk about a lot is that, so Brian David Mitchell, his teachings, that falls under the Mormon umbrella, but the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is just a fraction of the Mormon umbrella. And a lot of the world doesn't understand that, but also it seems like a lot of members of the church don't understand that. And so people will feel like the church specifically is being attacked when, we talk about Brian David Mitchell adopting polygamy as one of his key teachings that he was talking about. So one of the things that just came up for me as we were talking earlier was, as we were talking about these traumatic experiences, these traumatic stories, this traumatic content that you're constantly engrossed in. How do you protect yourself from the burnout, from the PTSD, from the types of things? I know you mentioned therapy, but it's heavy. So how do you handle that?
To that degree as well. I do a fair amount of pro bono work for families in crisis. So I've dealt with rape victims. I've dealt with murders. I've dealt with death by suicide. I had a really interesting experience a year or so ago. A friend from high school who was a trauma surgeon works in the ER, contacted me and said, my neighbor's missing. I need your help. And so we worked on this case for a couple of days, ended up finding the neighbor in the backyard, and he died by suicide, and was there for all the drama, the police, the widow being, talking through and working through. There's a lot of challenges. I mean, I guess those who watch CSI type programs may know, but there's a long process when something like that happens. And so being there through that whole experience, it was something that was a little bit jarring, but afterwards it was interesting because here I'm talking to somebody who deals with this in a similar fashion. And I said, so how do you work? How do you deal with these things? And she said, much like you in the moment, it's very clinical. I've got a job to do. I'm focused. In my case, it's helping somebody who's going through great trauma. In her case, it's putting somebody back together who's going through great trauma. And you do the job, and then at the end of the day, you have to find some sort of release for that. You have to, if it becomes pent up, it can become very destructive. And so I'm one that, and it was just an interesting discussion that you got to talk about it. You got to recognize some of those feelings. You've got to be able to find different outlets for it. I have an amazing wife that I'm able to talk to, a great therapist, good colleagues. I try to be very open about things like that. I think it's important for people who are working in situations like that to be able to say, how did that feel, or how are you handling that? Because it's really difficult for me, or I'm really feeling it today. Those
I
types
have
of
a
things.
support group.
And one of the other things that I'm wondering about is, just as somebody who you're putting these stories out there constantly, I know that this happened a lot in Elizabeth's case, and I'm sure it happens in other cases too, but where the police undermine you. And so there was the case where you figured out that it was Brian David Mitchell, Emmanuel at the time. And then also when Richard Reese, they were so focused on him and they would not look anywhere else, and they were just convinced that it was him. How do you tactfully handle these situations where, to me, I would be like, you're gaslighting me. Yeah, I know what I know. You are gaslighting me. So how did you navigate that, or how do you navigate that?
Sure. I'd like to say I could take credit for that. The Smart family in those cases were just unbelievable. You really see somebody's character behind the scenes, and they were just smart and savvy, but also wanted to stay above the fray. And sometimes I think there was a feeling externally and even inside of the extended family that maybe they were being taken advantage of because some people were being too nice. They recognized that law enforcement was still one of their best avenues, one of their best tools for finding Elizabeth, and they didn't want to damage that. And so there was a lot of discussion on, okay, how do we address this without stepping on somebody's toe? How can we talk about this issue? How can we make it about the issue and not about the people? And trying to keep it laser focused, and to say things assertively, but to do so diplomatically, so that we weren't burning bridges. And internally, though, there were some pretty. I was interested. I always got pulled into a lot of the police discussions. So when there were really difficult things going on, they pulled me in. I guess they recognized that I had a lot of influence on what was happening publicly. And so those discussions could be pretty heated with the family and law enforcement. They weren't just saying, oh yeah, we're listening to you at face value. You told us this before and that wasn't true. And what about, they would have a very pointed discussion. But yet publicly would address it, but never wanted to make anybody look bad. It was interesting to me, and it wasn't my call, but after Elizabeth was found, immediately the extended family was saying, we are not going to go after law enforcement. It's not productive. And if we do, there are 100 agents working on this. And of those police officers and agents, there's still a handful of them that completely were doing the right thing and believed and worked with us. And if we damn the police, we damn them as well. So everybody was doing the best job that they could under these circumstances. Mistakes were made. We're not going to say they weren't. At the same time, the most important thing is that Elizabeth is home, that she was rescued, that she's safe. and that's our focus, is on her and on helping her moving forward. That was really the message. And the media really wanted at that point to pile on, but there was nothing productive of piling on at that point. And we knew too that it was going to come out. We didn't need to say anything. The mayor was pretty upset about it. Other people were upset about how the investigation had been handled. Let it take its course, and truly let's focus on those things that are productive and most meaningful and important at this time.
That's right. We watch a lot of, TV shows of, police or crime, and there's always the commissioner or the mayor saying, putting pressure, we need to arrest somebody in this case, because I'm getting a lot of heat from my constituents and things like that. So did you feel any of that?
Oh, for sure. I think this was probably the big, but it was the biggest case, at least at that point, the Salt Lake Police Department had ever dealt with. They had never seen anything of that magnitude or pressure of that magnitude. When you're being scrutinized every hour, twice an hour, 20 hours a day on a 24-hour cable networks, and you're a big story, top story every night on network news and on the morning shows, and the New York Times and everybody else, you got 100 journalists out covering everything, that every word coming from your lips. That's a lot of pressure. That does, that makes your job really difficult. And there's no question that regardless if it's the Salt Lake Police Department or any other municipality or entity nationally, in those situations, it influences how you conduct an investigation and how you communicate how you're conducting that investigation.
So Elizabeth's found, and you weren't sure whether they found her body or whether they found her. So what was it like in that moment for you, as somebody that you knew that whatever this was, you were going to be sharing this with the world?
Absolutely. So a little background on that, Beth. The media was reluctant to cover the details surrounding Brian David Mitchell. The police department told the media to be careful of that. At one point said that that their PR representative was concocting a lot of this to try to get the story back in the news. And so the media stayed away from it. John Walsh at America's Most Wanted was one of the few that really went full bore with the story. Brian David Mitchell's sister came forward, said, "That's my brother. He's capable of this. He's got a lot of things that you really need to look into." And then it was a couple of weeks after that Elizabeth's uncle Tom went to the Salt Lake Tribune and just slammed law enforcement. We had tried so hard to stay above board, and so the
loose cannon.
Tribune, a bit of a loose cannon. Tom's a very emotional person and played a huge role in Elizabeth's rescue. But at times, that emotional side for anybody who's that emotional can seep over and be problematic. So the story, which was somewhere buried in the B section when Brian David Mitchell was announced, the criticism of law enforcement is over the fold in the Tribune, and everybody nationally is calling. New York Times, Today's Show, you name it. And so that the day that story hit, Ed and Tom and I were meeting at about noon. We were going to do a press briefing at 2. Ed, Elizabeth's father, he felt that some of Tom's comments were justified. And part of Tom's argument was that they weren't putting enough emphasis on Brian David Mitchell. And so Tom was going to walk back some of his comments. Ed was going to put some pressure on it. So we were meeting at about noon, and Tom arrived a few minutes early, and right before the meeting was supposed to start, Ed called and he said, "Hey, I'm not supposed to be calling you." And I said, "Well, why are you calling me then?" And he said, "Well, I've been summoned to the Sandy City Police Department. I've been told to talk to nobody, not to talk to anybody, to get there as quickly as possible. I'm going to miss the meeting, and I'm concerned. I don't know how long this is going to take." And I said, "Ed, don't worry about it. Get down there." And fortuitously, one of the only people I kept in contact with from high school was a detective with the Sandy City Police Department. So I began calling him incessantly. He finally picked up, was actually kind of rude and hung up on me, and then called me back.
Because you used to tease him in school, right?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, I was. He was actually a basketball teammate. It was the greatest assist that it was ever thrown my way. And that was when he called me back and said, "We brought in an indigent teenager that we believe is Elizabeth Smart." And I paused and tried to contain my emotions and said, "Where did you find the body?" And he said, "What body?" "She's in the room next to me." And so, there was more to that, but knew very early on, 45 minutes before the news broke, knew that she had been rescued, that she was safe. We had a resolution plan that we'd put together, and so the family knew exactly what to do. Everyone had been informed. I mean, it was like clockwork. And
right,
then
you
when
can be
that's
really on top of what was going to happen. You can be very prepared.
absolutely, and part of that strategy too was we wanted the police to provide detail before we responded in any way. So the message to the media was, we will respond. We'll do a press briefing at some point. I don't know about interviews. And we'll let you know when we have that time. And to a degree, Beth, because of the Brian David Mitchell details, which we didn't know a lot of, we wanted to have the ability to provide some context. Kind of an aside to that, the only call I took from the media, I'm getting calls from literally Tom Brokaw, and Tom's retired at this point, Brian Williams, Barbara Walters. And my receptionist is just like, you got to be kidding me. Like, who else can call you? And of the who's who in the media. And all of it was send them the voicemail. Tell them we'll be, there'll be a press conference later tonight. We're not doing anything prior to that, and send them to my voicemail. And they still were calling, but John Walsh called, and there's a lot to the John Walsh story that goes deeper than just him being the kind of the hero in the end. There was a point where he leaked some information that was very challenging for the family. But John called, and I agreed to take his call, and John was very emotional. He lost his son. His son was abducted and murdered, and he was very emotional on the phone, and said, I didn't get Adam back, but we got Elizabeth, and she's like my daughter now. And so John and I had a very touching conversation. And at the end, he said, well, like, if you say no, I totally understand. But he had a daytime talk show at that time that was recorded a week or two in advance. And he said, if you would do a phone interview with me right now, it won't run for a couple of days, I would be really appreciative. And I did. And it was actually, I'm really grateful that I did, because I've gone back. It's in one of those videos. You can hear the emotion in my voice. You kind of get a feel for what that period was like. But John said, after we did the interview, came back on for a minute, and he said, I want you to take these notes very carefully. He said, these are Elizabeth's victims' rights. She's not to be interviewed alone. If she is tired, she can go home. He went through and gave me 4 or 5 things. He said, call Ed now, make sure that these are being followed. And I called Ed, and the law enforcement was doing the exact opposite. And so when Ed was pretty frustrated. There was a detective in particular that he had been sideways with more than a few times. And from what I understand, Ed went and was taking a swing at him, and somebody grabbed Ed and they restrained him. And I got a call from the police department telling me I needed to get down to calm Ed Smart down and connect him with John Walsh. So my office was a few miles away. I drove down to the public safety building. They'd moved Elizabeth by this point to downtown Salt Lake. The roads had been closed in front. There were helicopters over. I mean, this was like out of a movie. I mean, there are dozens and dozens of reporters. I try to very carefully get through that, and I'm noticed, and there's a whole horde of media screaming and pushing and trying to get me to say something, and I duck under the thing. But anyway, I worked with Ed to calm him down, to get him with John, and also to go to the police and basically say, we need to wrap this up. Elizabeth's been talking to you for several hours now. And the reason the police department did this, by the way, was because that testimony, without her being influenced by family or friends or the media, is much stronger than from down the road, or from in the ensuing hours and days. And so at that point,
otherwise it might have been contaminated, right?
Right. So we negotiated kind of a compromise on that. Like, hey, we'll give you another half an hour to ask whatever you need to ask. Lois Smart will be there with Elizabeth. And then at that point, she's going to go home, and we'll continue to work and cooperate with you. And so she had another half an hour. And I was there when her siblings were reunited with her, and saw her state of mind. She and her brother in the elevator on the way down. He says, hey, Elizabeth, you'll never believe I got straight A's. And Elizabeth said, you got straight A's? And he said, yeah, I got straight A's. And she said, what, did the teacher give you the benefit of the doubt because I was gone? Did you cheat? How did you and they're just going at it. And this is 10 minutes after they've been reunited. And it really demonstrated, though, at the time, her mindset. Was she a victim of Stockholm syndrome? Did she want to be with her family? And I'm really there's I think two of us that are flies on the wall that aren't part of family and law enforcement that witness this. So I become a much more important figure in this. Generally in my role, I stay behind the scenes. I was a spokesperson on weekends, or if there was something really difficult, there was a reason, but I tried to stay behind the scenes. And so at this point, I now have a much more important role in characterizing Elizabeth's mindset and helping to provide some perspective on where she's coming from as these details are emerging regarding Brian David Mitchell and the horror she's been through.
So with that, the immediate aftermath, there was media, there were people who were saying like, oh, she ran away. Or I've even gotten comments on my video about how this was a cover up because she was pregnant and they sent her away for 9 months, right? Yeah. There's just all of these crazy theories that are coming out. Mm-hmm. How do you handle that when, some of these are just absolutely absurd and pretty offensive? Like the fact that she just went through something horrible and they're saying that.
So from a general crisis communication standpoint, I'm working on a case right now where I had one of my associates go through and look at all the media and social media coverage and what are the questions that are being posed? What is what's the crazy speculation? Okay, how do we can't address all of it. Some of it's just so crazy. If you addressed it, you give it some validity. But at least are we considering everything and what we're saying and how we're responding? Are we answering some of those questions? And we always look at it too from what would a reasonable, rational person think or say or expect us to do in this situation? I can't get someone who's crazy. I can't change their mind. And really, sometimes that doesn't matter anyway. So people are going to say what they're going to say. There are more trolls than ever online. There are more people, I think, that have conspiracy theories, believe conspiracy theories wholeheartedly. Not that we shouldn't question things either. I won't proclaim that, but I think there's some that are so caught up in it that it becomes important to really realize who and where and what can be communicated. And so those are things that were taken into consideration at that time. How do we demonstrate what we can to provide a factual representation of who she is, what she's been through? In the same vein, you want to preserve some things for legal purposes, and so wanting to make sure that we're not saying anything that could hurt the case, but being very strategic in the information that is provided, but doing so sometimes very deliberately to help overcome some of those rumors, or at least helping those who are reasonable and rational to recognize that is a lot of hearsay and that's a lot of speculation that they shouldn't subscribe to.
I love that. And you were depicted really fascinatingly in a movie.
Yeah.
The guy looks like me now. I mean, if
they were predicting the future.
Yeah, they'd cast him for me now. I think he's closer, but yeah, he was follically challenged and didn't look a lot like me, but it was flattering that they depicted me for sure.
You mentioned that in one of your videos on your channel, and you say you read the script and you thought the script was awful, but your friend said, it's going to have your name in it. You don't want to miss the opportunity. And then you show a little bit of the clip and you preface it by saying, this is how Hollywood sort of envisioned it of things. Can you tell me the difference between how you experience it and what was shown on on that movie?
The old Paul Rubens movie that I think has come back into vogue, has that cult following, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. And if you remember in the show at the end, they do a story of his life, and it is so bad. I think Chris Christopherson is playing Pee-wee. And he's watching it, and at some point someone asked him something, and he said, I don't need to watch anymore. I lived it. But I think that would be a good representation. I mean, it was just so far from anything that was true. We'll hold a press conference. We're going to deny that. It was
overly dramatic.
It's a complex story, and we were talking in the prior segment about what is it like, the podcast that demonstrates kind of what I do, and it's not even talking with family and friends about public relations and crisis communications. It's difficult to understand and get that. And so from Hollywood trying to tell that part of the story in a very short frame. They go to those stereotypes. They go to the past ways in which it's been perceived. So it was nothing even close to what it was like, but I guess still in the same vein, flattering. And I think my good friend who said just sign it was right. We did get some calls though. It was funny, after the movie ran like on a Sunday, and Monday morning we got 4 or 5 calls from other public relations professionals around the country who either didn't like how we handled it in the TV movie or thought it was poor taste that we would lend our names to something that represented our profession and our industry in such a poor light. And it's like, then I wouldn't have those great clips for my site though, right? So it was the right decision.
Yeah. You win some, you lose some.
That's right. So take a look, see if it seems anything like real life.
Yeah. Oh, I've watched it. It is. You said you called it corny, and yeah, it's very much the Lifetime dramatized energy for sure. So
it's the epitome of that, Beth. It's not just that; it's the epitome of it.
It really is. It really is. But hey, it was helpful in my research. So anyway.
So Beth, do you have any more cutting questions, deep dives?
No, those were the really big ones. So
one thing I was thinking is that, we're talking about the pressure on the police department. A little bit of pressure in a way would be, there are hundreds of thousands of families in the Salt Lake Valley, the Happy Valley that have daughters that wonder if their daughter is going to be the next one while all this is going on. That has got to put like a downer on the whole community, with a pallor or whatever I think is the word. Did you sort of feel that when you would go to church and other places where they're hushed conversations, wondering about things like that?
Oh, I think there still are. I would think in the LDS community, but especially along the Wasatch Front, that there are people that are probably more paranoid than they need to be. A lot of the mothers now grew up, they were Elizabeth's age or around her age and grew up and had experienced and seen this. So that definitely played in, and how do you balance being vigilant with not scaring your children? I've seen it with my own kids. Initially was very protective, and again, my amazing wife recognizing, honey, look, you got to let go a little bit. You got to let these kids live. Got to let them have a childhood. There's always a risk. Things can always happen. And at the same time, you're robbing them of life experience if you're holding them too close. So you got to find that right balance and find, it's always trusting your gut too, listening to what's right. But it's easy. It's easy because of Elizabeth Smart to become overly protective and to worry more than we need to worry.
That's right. Well, thanks again for coming on the show. This has been fascinating. I'm thinking the second half of this show is going to be worth, I might have to charge $50 a person.
There you go. I hope so. Hope it was helpful.
And now that you've met Beth, maybe Beth, you'd like to invite Chris on your show someday.
Oh, absolutely.
And you guys can get connected. Can I share, not right now, but your
absolutely.
information, your contact information with Beth, and she can text you and get all that. So
sure.
Thank you.
So this has been exciting. We got more things to do. Beth actually has kids she has to take care of sometime today.
I do.
So great.
Well, and I've got have you ever been to Sunstone, Chris?
I have not. I've been around it, but I've never actually been. So
yeah, it's going to be at the University of Utah starting August 1st. I'm going to be interviewing in a half hour or so one of the presenters. I'm going to try to do a series on Sunstone teasers, like Sunstone sneak peek or something like that, and see if I can get some more interest in the lectures. My wife went with me last year, and she enjoys all the people that come. There's such a wide range of people that come. You have like 1/3 are we'll say true believing members, and 1/3 don't believe anymore, and then there's 1/3 of the people are like from all kinds of other segments. This is one of the shirts they give out.
Love it.
You know, there's more than one way to Mormon. So
Love
like
it.
there's polygamists there. There's, you know,
It's so great.
What Community of Christ people are there. It's
I've been telling my friends that I'm going, and I'm like, it is Comic-Con for Mormons.
yeah, it's really cool.
You know, I think it's great though. Get out of your comfort zone. That'd be my advice, and this is a great place to do it. You know, try to see things a little differently, and
yeah, explore the world.
Explore a little bit. Yeah, that sounds amazing. I love the shirt.
Thanks. Yeah, this is from the Sunstone organization. So anyhow, thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you later.
Awesome. Thank you both. Enjoyed the time.
Thank you.
So let's see. I don't know how to use this very much. I think I can remove you, and then I'll talk with Beth for just a little bit more. I'm trying to figure out how to remove this now. Thanks everyone for watching. Like and subscribe, do all the fun things, and we'll talk to everyone later. Have a great rest of the summer. Bye.